Hi, guys. Welcome to another Monday night live stream. This week, I wanted to just take some time and go over some of the things that we're doing in the future and the way the ministry is going, and some really interesting scrolls that are coming up in this next year. So, just a few things starting off. I think it's interesting. We've got the President Trump coming in, of which the government will be extremely pro Israel. And one of the things that's my hope is that the last time President Trump had a 4-year term, up until that time began, the status quo, so to speak, was don't dig, don't do anything that might be land that might be given to someone else, land for peace type stuff. And so many years went by without them digging and looking for new scrolls. It was just almost impossible to get anything like that happening, whether it's war or peacetime, either one. So when President Trump came in, he basically said, whatever, I mean, it's your land. If you can dig something up, show it, and make money, that's a good thing to do. So they knew they had 4 years at least to do something. And so they did start doing that. And because of that, we have Cave 12. And Cave 12 has a parchment that has not been released to the public yet, but it's in process. So it'll be really interesting for everyone to see what finally is written on that. Anyway, that's one possible scroll that we might be able to get a hold of next year. The next thing is that we've had 4 years of a Biden administration, which is back to the status quo of don't dig. It might be land that you have to give to someone to make peace. Well, again, with the new upcoming Trump administration, it'll probably go back to the way it was the first time, which means they'll have at least 4 years, if not further out, because there are certain prophecies that have to be fulfilled. Maybe not right now, but eventually. And so we know of the Israelis. I know about the Israelis who know about at least 3 locations in Israel where they've done scans that we know there are objects there, underground chambers with objects. Might be scrolls, might be everybody's looking for gold and silver. I'm looking very much for the scrolls, which may or may not be there, but it'll be interesting to look and see those. In the area in general, there are several places that might be scrolls that have never been excavated, and I don't know why, but probably politics in other countries and things. So there's a lot of interesting things going on. I'm going to talk about a couple of them tonight. So what I want to do first is let's just go through some of the upcoming things. So as you know, I work a lot with Prophecy Watchers, and this is the Prophecy Watchers website. And first off, if we scan down here, we have this upcoming Christmas, not really Christmas, it's December 5th through the 8th. And it's going to be live streamed. And of course, you can come there also. I think we have 30 some speakers. Right now, it's according to this, it's 23. I thought we had more. But anyway, at least 23 speakers with at least 40 messages. So some of us are speaking twice. I'm going to be speaking on the current situation, well, it's not exactly current. The upcoming war between Iran and Israel, it's prophesied out of scriptures, scrolls, and other places, and the Nephilim connection with that particular war. And it's unusual that there is anything like that. That's more of an L.A. Marzulli area than mine. But when it comes up in a scroll, it's pretty interesting to me also. So anyway, as you can see here, we've got Gary Stearman will be there. Be good to see him again. I don't see him that much anymore. Mondo, L.A. Marzulli, Jonathan Kahn, Billy Crone, Bill Salas, myself, and Alex Newman. And then we've got several others, J.B. Hickston, Brandon Holthouse, Don Perkins, Larry Olison, Derek Gilbert, Bill Koenig, Matt Freeman, Josh Peck will be there, talking about scrolls, I'm sure, somewhere along the line. Patrick Wood, Michael Carey, Lee Brainerd, good friend, Bob McGinnis, Colonel Bob McGinnis, talking about the state of the things in the current government situation, and I'm sure he's elated that we might be going back the right way. Donna Howe, Ken Knight, and then Terry James. So those are probably everyone, but we might have more. Anyway, so you can sign up for the live streaming and get that, and it's available for 6 months. So it's a lot of information to go through. And so a lot of times people that go there still usually get the streaming because it's usually 2 or 3 rooms going at the same time with 20 some different speakers just over 2 or 3 days. So anyway, just wanted to let you know that that's still going. I'm getting ready for that. I've got my presentations almost done. But if we go back to the top, I wanted to make a couple of interesting points to you. Rick Renner did a show with them specifically about the Ark. But there's a really interesting little catch. If you watch this, I'm not sure how long this one is, but in his book, he was talking about Nephilim and different things and the Ark and pre-flood history. And he has a really good, most people have a really good ability to pull things together and to take a guess at how it probably went together. And it seems like most of the time they're correct. I'll find a scroll that tells us exactly what happened, and the guesses are actually pretty accurate. But it was a really interesting thing that he had shared, and I want to share that with you tonight. And then why it's important to me, because there's other things connected with it. But in Matthew 24, we have the Lord talking about the end times, the wars and rumors of wars and things like that. Well, if we go to Luke's version, and I'm using the Blue Letter Bible here because it works really good for an interlinear. Plus, one of the things that I've done recently, you guys may know about Windows trying to be more, I guess, friendly, helpful. But they've put a system in Windows called Recall. And basically the idea behind it, or the way they're building it, is that Recall will take a screenshot of everything that you're doing every 5 seconds or so. And it will use OCR type stuff to pull out the data instead of this being a picture. Like right here is maybe this is a picture, but it'll be able to pull it off and see what the data is and that stuff. So between the pictures and listening to the microphone and anything else that it may do, it'll get a good idea that you're hunting for a certain cookware, a certain code, whatever, and hopefully be able to match you up with the right person, to make money and save you money and advertising and all that kind of stuff. Problem with that is that if I'm doing bank translations, it might be able to see my bank accounts, my routing number, my passwords. And they say, it's just between us and them, and that stuff is for you. It's on your computer. It doesn't go anywhere. Problem is, though, if you have a virus, it can be exploited. It's already been proven that it could be exploited. And so there's been talk about putting it on, taking it off, allowing you to do, whatever, let you decide. They basically, last time I checked, they basically came out and said it's going to be part of the system. It's not going to be optional. That's just the way it is for the next version, the 24 release candidate, I believe. Anyway, the next one coming out. I don't think it's out yet completely, but the guys talking about it have noticed that if you buy, say, 1,000 copies of Windows for all your computers in your company, there are extra tools that they provide so that you can stop and start pieces of it. Say you want Cortana, or you don't want this, whatever. Maybe you don't want Microsoft Mail because you want some other kind of mail because you're doing whatever you're doing in your company. So you're able to tweak those. So those are just tools put out by Microsoft. So the guys are looking at ways of turning Recall off. They found a way to turn it off, but at the same time, it breaks the file explorer, which is weird. So there's probably a way to do it. And for those of you that want to stay on Windows, there's a guy, Chris Titus, who has a Windows utility, which is really good. It's not real hard to learn. You can instantly turn those things off and on, however you want to do them. If you want to get rid of Edge or OneDrive or whatever you're doing, you should be able to do that. They're working on turning this option off, and I'm sure they'll be able to do it eventually. But the whole idea of going down that road, especially not making things optional and trying to bill it that you're doing this. I was a Microsoft certified professional for a number of years. I worked at Sprint for a number of years at the help desk, and I loved Windows, and I liked Linux and playing around with it, but we always came back to Windows. Well, this is my main broadcast PC, and this is Linux. I switched over 2 or 3 weeks ago just to be able to get ready to go forward. So any PC that's I'm doing banking on or just normal stuff, it'll have more control over it. So those are things that I want to talk about eventually later on next year. I want to do some members only live streams. And if you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, Linux, there's a lot of things you can do with Linux that you can't with Windows and vice versa. So one of the things my son has said, it's like, well, the thing stopping me is playing games. Like if you play, I don't know, Black Ops or, some of those main role-playing games type stuff, the ones that are graphics intensive. It always has been that doesn't work very well in Linux, if at all. Now I've tested it recently, going back through the stuff. They all work fine. Everything that I can get a hold of to test, that is. So it's really interesting in that respect. So anyway, so we're changing tools over to open source. And again, the concept of open source is the code of how it works is available to the public. Everybody can see it. There's no way that it would have a virus or spyware because everybody would see it. So if it's open source, it's very, very trustworthy. Anyway, so long story. So one of the glitches is that I usually use eSword, which is a fantastic Bible program. I cannot get it to run on Linux, one of the very, very few programs that still doesn't seem to work. So for these things, I'll use Blue Letter Bible. Reason I mentioned that. We also want to start doing some studies in the herbal medicine from the scrolls and go forward. I have a lot of stories to tell you about things we've tried, some that didn't work, some that work fantastically. So those are things that we want to do in the future also. But let me look at this now, specifically Luke 21, verse 11. So this is a place, that Jesus said there'll be earthquakes and famines and pestilences, but don't be scared because the end is not yet. Kingdom will rise against kingdom and nation against nation and all this stuff. And this is the exact same thing as Matthew 24, except there's one clause in Luke 21:11 that's not in Matthew. And I usually read Matthew rather than Luke, so this kind of was interesting to me. So this says there will be great earthquakes in diverse places. This is King James. And famines and pestilences. So that's exactly the same wording in Matthew. But then it adds this. And fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. Now, first, let me tell you what Rick said, and then I'll tell you what I thought of, because when you look at this, instantly a certain scroll pops out in my head because of the way that's saying it. There's a scroll that we have called that talks about fearful signs on earth, and then also awesome signs or terrible or whatever signs from heaven in the last days. Now they're mentioned here and in other places, but in that scroll, it's very detailed in a description of what kind of signs on earth and what kind of signs in heaven. And it's really interesting. And at first I thought that's a little too specific and it fits with our time. But anyway, so here's the thing though. First, Rick brought this out. And let me just click on this with the tools. We can do the interlinear. So it's, and great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences, and then it says fearful sights. Now this is a phrase, and this button here, basically you can search for that phrase, but it means that the translators translated one word, fearful sights, because it doesn't quite come out right in English for one word. And it's the word phobitron. Now you might remember the word phobias, or in Greek, phobia in English. So if I have a fear of spiders, I have arachnophobia. Arachna is an 8-legged creature. Phobia is a fear. If I have a fear of heights, it's whatever the word is. Anyway, but you see that idea. So in this case, though, Phobotron, when you take tron and put onto a word in Greek, it means an instrument, basically. So it's a thing, a physical object. If they'd never seen a machine gun before and had a machine gun, they'd probably say that's a phobotron. That's an instrument that scares the daylights out of me. I don't know how you could aim one of those at me and I could survive. So it causes great fear, but it's an object of some sort. And what I thought was interesting is that he said, now this only occurs once. Let me click on here. This is the Strong's. So we'll get the Strong's idea. And you can see it only occurs one time in the King James, in the TR, and in the Septuagint also probably the same place, and in its unique form. So they translate it fearful sights, or fearful things that you would see, for instance. And down here, it simply means, according to Strong's, it's just something that strikes terror or cause of fright. Now, again, it's not a mild fright, it's terror. If we were in the midst of the war and people were going door to door killing people, and all of a sudden there's a knock at my door, my heart would jump. I would be fearfully afraid, not just afraid, but I would be in complete terror, knowing what's at the door or thinking what might be at the door. And so anyway, this object, this thing, this person, or whatever. But what I thought was interesting is for phobotron, fearful sight. This is just King James, or just the Bible rather. Rick was saying that if you go to other manuscripts from that time period, first century Greek, the word phobotron specifically is translated monsters. And so the idea behind it is, if I run into a bear in the woods, if I don't smell like food and I don't bother it, it probably won't bother me. I need to be very careful, but not terrified. It's not going to be every single time a bear sees me, it's going to try to kill me. Most of the time they don't, they just run away. Now, in the tribulation period, the animals will attack, so that does kind of fit. But if instead of a bear, like a small brown bear, which could kill me, but maybe not, I could probably kill it with a weapon. If it was a double-sized, deformed bear that might be twice as strong, claws twice as big, it would be a monster of a bear, so to speak, a non-natural form of this thing that is extremely fearful. It's not a good thing. It's a very dangerous thing. So what I thought was interesting is he was talking about the whole idea of Nephilim, and Nephilim returning at the end times. So in this sense, he said this is translated, usually translated monsters. And so he's saying that this is an indication that Nephilim would come back in the last days. So right about now, at least the Nephilim creatures, or at least the technology. And if you think about it, when humans get a hold of technology, and this is the genetic tampering, it starts with making a better potato, and hopefully it is better, more resistant to bugs and everything, but it may have side effects because you change something. But then you go to microbes and bacteria and viruses, and you get things that are deadly, could become deadly, weapons of warfare, mass destruction, things like that, and then going up into higher life forms. And that's definitely what we are experimenting on today. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So let me go back here to, how do I get out of this? Probotron. Let me just back up to there. Okay, so let me get out of here and close this. So if you look at this, there will be earthquakes in diverse places, famines and pestilences, fearful sights, and great signs there will be from heaven. So in context, it's fearful sights probably on earth, and great signs from heaven. Now, there is a manuscript called the Testament of Our Lord, and I've been looking for it for years. It's part of the Ethiopic Bible, and which is the Bible of Ethiopia. It's written in Ge'ez. We have some of those. So for instance, a Protestant Bible has 66 books, Old and New Testament. Old and New Testament for that one would be, I think, 84, 80 some books anyway, most of which I guess have still not been translated. But supposedly they have a testament of the Lord, and it's supposed to be what the Lord taught the disciples, or some of what the Lord taught the disciples after his resurrection and before his ascension. And if you just go back and read the Gospels, you know that the Lord taught them all things, or explained to them all things, it says, answered all their questions, and then he ascended. And we've always wondered, I wish I could have been the fly on the wall to listen to the conversations. Just like in the book of John, it says many things that the Lord did could be written and probably are somewhere. But if everything that he did was written, I don't think even the world could contain the books. So the point being is that this is written that you can know and believe. This is enough. So what was interesting about this is that recently I ran across, and I got thinking about this, if a manuscript is totally fake, it might wind up in a Bible somewhere. But if it's at least partially true, or even if people thought it was true, whatever, it should be translated into other languages. So I looked for Greek, and there's nothing like that really in Greek. But there is a text called the Testament of Our Lord, put together by Clement of Rome. And putting it together, he basically has kind of like a didache type thing that's what deacons and bishops should do, and if they should be paid, and what days they take off, and how you design a church, and tithing, and just church stuff. And it's irrelevant to us because our church is run however our church is run. We don't maybe even have deacons in that respect or whatever. But at the very beginning of this, he tacks on the testament of the Lord. So I was able to find that, and these things were around. It's just hard to find them, and that's what I'm trying to do, is pull all these together. But in the text, there is a section where it specifically talks about fearful sights on earth and woeful sights, I believe it's translated, in the heavens. And it begins to describe exactly what those are. And in that particular text, the fearful sights on earth is all about Nephilim. It's very, very interesting. We have a copy of part of it on our network, and the guys on the network have been looking at it for a while. But the whole thing is not there. I've just recently got the entire thing translated. So that's one thing that I want to get to you guys so that we can study and eventually pull all these together and publish more of them. But I just thought this was really interesting, since I knew about that phrase, fearful sights on earth, woeful sights in heaven. And it's not just a comment, but it's an entire paragraph of what those things are. And then Rick brings this out, this fearful sights, presumably on earth, and great signs from heaven. And that immediately makes me think of that testament. And then when he brings up the fact that fearful sights is a phrobatron, which is a fearful thing, and specifically in the older text, it means a monster type contraption or being. Like lions don't bother people that often either. But you get, in Africa, you get a lion that tastes human blood, and now he hunts humans. That becomes, by definition, a monster. That's a normal lion, but it's totally different. It's much, much more dangerous. So I just wanted to, that's one thing I wanted to bring to you tonight. I just thought that was really, really fascinating. So let me, at this point, go over here. I want to show you a couple things with our, let's see. Oh, I keep meaning to get, well, let me go here. This is our Bible Facts site. And if we go to our bookstore, I wanted to share, this is our latest book, Ancient Prophecies in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And about a month back, we finally got the audiobook done for it on Audible. So all you got to do is click on this, and you should be able to go to here, and there should be, yeah, there you go, audiobook with membership. I'm not signed in. So you can get the Kindle, the paperback, or now the audiobook. And I just wanted to let you guys know that because I keep forgetting to mention it. So let me get back out of here. So this is our Dead Sea Scrolls study section of our books. We've got several things, ancient translations. Ezra is very good in prophecy, and then Jasher and other things for just general. But in the Dead Sea Scroll things, we've got Enoch translated, which is from the Ethiopic. We only have a handful of chapters in the Dead Sea Scrolls from Enoch. And much like the Jubilees, also, we have a handful of chapters from Jubilees. The stories are identical, so we know it's the same book. The numbers, the dates are different, which makes sense. Dates and names always gets changed for some reason. So we've got those two. Those are two of our older ones. We've got the Ancient Order of Melchizedek, explaining the order, and I think we have half of the book of Hebrews in there, just describing it. The book of Gad, the seer, Gad was a prophet that David used. David and Nathan were the two major prophets for King David. They both wrote manuscripts, or books rather, and they both contain prophecy. So we have Gad. We managed to get that and get it translated. I have fragments of Nathan, but I'm still trying to get the rest of it to put it together. Whenever we do, we will get it published for you guys. Testaments of the Patriarchs, that's all out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this one specifically is, the teaching is that the patriarchs, which is Adam to Aaron, wrote a last will and testament for their kids. Well, half of those have at least a small section on prophecy. So you get to see how they viewed the Messiah and salvation and upcoming prophecies. Fascinating for us to read. And then our Dead Sea Scroll calendar, very important because it really helps us verify dates, set dates sometimes, those type of things. And then the Damascus Covenant is all about the history and the theology of the Essenes. So fascinating. And then the ancient prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls, anything that's not a testament over here that's prophetic, we put together in this book. There's still some other things to do, but that's the bulk of the prophetic type teachings from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the testaments, and then the prophecy book. So I wanted to share that with you. And let me go back to here. One other thing I wanted to share with you on our Bible Facts website, if anything was to happen and we would get kicked off of Rumble or YouTube or Facebook or anything like that, and we just disappear from you, you can always come to BibleFacts.org and see what we're doing. Maybe we changed something, maybe somebody didn't like us and we got kicked off, whatever the case may be. But we'll always have some sort of a broadcast teaching for the church family here. So anyway, right now it's YouTube, because we have a membership on YouTube, and the ad revenue really helps to support the ministry. So anyway, we get down here, the resources. We've got Canon Studies, Dead Sea Scroll Studies, and other PDFs and files, and you guys know a little bit about this. Over here in the About section, I just changed a few things over. So we've got the About Us, the Statement of Faith, and then the Bible Facts Network. It's a small network through Mighty Networks. It's kind of like Facebook, but we can say what we want, discuss things, and won't be shut down for saying the wrong thing. So it's a good place for us to get together and study. But I just added these two here today, and we moved them down here and replaced it to here. So here's a public calendar. So I just wanted to share that with you. So if we click on it, this is, we're beginning to use our Trello boards again because the ministry is kind of expanding. But so for instance, right now, this is the 25th, this is Monday. Let me turn our thing off so you can see this. Okay, so down at the bottom, this is the month of November, and the 25th is highlighted because we're broadcasting right now. Tomorrow, Mondays, of course, we broadcast on YouTube. On Tuesdays, I have a home fellowship in my home that I teach here, connected with Calvary Chapel, Johnson County. So it's a home fellowship of that church here. So tomorrow it's canceled because we have some family going away for Thanksgiving. So we're having our Thanksgiving tomorrow. And so that of course is canceled. There's no way I can do a broadcast. If you're curious, I do a broadcast out of my basement. I've got a small room in the basement that I've got set up really well with sound dampening. The panels behind me, if you can see them, the brown paneling are sound dampening, so works out really, really good. But anyway, if you go over to the next month, December, you can see from the 5th through the 8th is our Branson conference. So I don't know if I have information. You should be, I don't have any on there, but once I get this set up, you'll be able to click on here and there'll be links and stuff like that. But it's from the 5th to the 8th, and that's one with Prophecy Watchers we just talked about. So because of that, we'll get back maybe Sunday, but maybe Monday. I'm not sure. Depends on what else is going on. So we canceled the 9th and the 10th, which is the Monday broadcast, and then the Tuesday Bible study right here are canceled. And then Christmas and New Year's are down here. So we canceled both of them right before Christmas and right before New Year's. So we won't be broadcasting, and the home fellowship won't be going on these 2 weeks. So this is a nice place to come to see if we're doing something, or if you're thinking of maybe stopping in on a Tuesday night, or want to see if we're broadcasting or whatever. If it's been canceled, it'll definitely be here. So some of the things that we're doing, and hopefully that helps a little bit. So again, our BibleFacts.org website, about, and then public calendar. So those are the things that we're doing. So let me think here. The other thing I wanted to share with you, just kind of go through and see, and let me put that back on. So if you got questions, just put them in the chat room, and then we'll do those things later. The other thing was, I'm going to go to our other Trello board. I just wanted to share you a few things that we've been working on, and we'll eventually make these public so you can watch us and maybe even be able to vote on it to see what the next thing is you would like to do. So this is actually the stuff for broadcast. So it would be the type of thing that would show up here really well that I can use, and then I would also possibly make it into book form. But these are the things that we've done recently. If you start to the bottom, there's an epistle of Polycarp to Philippi that goes along with the teachings of Philippians. It's extremely important for our time. Very, very amazing work. So we've done that. We've got that. That's on our network also, but we'll be using it. Also, some people have asked me about Acts 29. If we basically understand the Bible is put together, it's inspired, and what we have is all we need, but there are other documents out there. And Eusebius, the father of church history, has mentioned that Acts has basically, it ends with Paul's first imprisonment in Rome, because that's all that Luke was with Paul for, and Luke finished it and then went elsewhere. So Luke never added anything else because he wasn't there. But there is an Acts 29 that talks about Paul's travels. He was going to try to go to Spain. Things blinking a little bit. And then other places. The thing is, there's a prophecy about 2 pillars in it, and I could never find, I don't know if you guys see it blinking right up here. I'm seeing that, but it just might be me. But anyway, and I could never find those pillars, so I'm assuming Acts 29 is a fake document. Well, recently I was able to figure out where they are, and they do still exist. So very interesting thing to look at. I'm also working on a translation of the Targums. They are actually in actually, if we go back here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So under PDFs, we should have the Targum. So right here we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. What those are, it's a compilation of the different Targums. A Targum is an Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Old Testament book. So the translation is not that relevant, but in a Targum, they would add commentary in each verse. So there's liable to be some commentary in there that's really interesting. There's a few things I found about like the Messiah, for instance. For instance, we always talk about Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 is the suffering servant. And some Jews try to say, well, that's Israel or that's something else. That's not the Messiah. Well, the Targum actually says it is Messiah. Just flat out says that. So really interesting things. And of course, they would say, well, that's a garbled one. Somebody added to it, whatever. But the fact that those things exist, I think, are really, really interesting. So we're working on getting the Targums finished. Then there's the Hebrew. We've got finished the Hebrew version of James and Jude. Those are from the Cochin Hebrew manuscripts. That's the same place that I got the book of Gad the Seer and the fragments of Nathan. A little bit different. It's basically the same. One of the things I thought interesting about James and Jude, though, is that, well, in James, he just says a bunch of stuff, and then he gives you the example of Job, mentions Job once, and then goes on. Well, in the Hebrew version, it's different enough that you can tell 2 times before there, he's not just saying, this is my opinion. It's actually a quote from Job. So that makes much more sense. There's actually 2 quotes from the book of Job in James, in the Hebrew version. And then he mentions, so this is my understanding of Job. So that makes perfect sense. So what I've noticed in those things, they're not a whole lot different, but they do seem to be smoother in understanding. And you notice much quicker when there's an actual quote out of the Old Testament. So really fascinating. Some people are trying to say these are the originals. They're definitely an extremely early, probably 1st century type early Hebrew translation. It still could be translated from the Greek or from something else. It's definitely not translated from the Greek that we have now. So either way, it's extremely early. So I would treat it just like we would the Georgian, the Coptic, the Ge'ez, early Latin, Syriac, stuff like that. Very, very interesting. We have our DSS Old Testament. And again, that's back. If we go back here and come out of here, we have in our Dead Sea Scroll studies right here. If we click on that, we have the Dead Sea Scroll Old Testament. So that is a PDF. It's free for you guys to have. It's everything from the scrolls and from the commentaries in the scrolls, from Genesis to the Malachi. So like if we click on this, everything in black is going to be the same as we have it in our Hebrew. If there's something missing, it's grayed. And let me bring this up here a little bit. As you can see right here, this thing is grayed. So this is in our Bible, but not in the scrolls. And anything red and underlined is in the scrolls. It's not in our Bible. So half the time this is a phrase or a different word that replaces that. So it's just really interesting to kind of see those and go through. As you can see, like Genesis 2, we don't have much of it. We're missing many verses, but there's a lot of stuff in here. There's Genesis chapter 5. We've got 1 verse. But anyway, what's there, and then what's there, though, is word perfect. So, and that's something you guys can do. They have these out, but that's something I was able to do and go through and look at the text and translate it, to put it together. Because everybody puts the Dead Sea Scroll Bible books together, but they always forget to look at the commentary. And sometimes you'll have commentary saying, here's the scripture, and here's my interpretation. Well, at that point, ignore the interpretation. It may or may not be correct. But if they're quoting a verse, then commenting on it, that's their verse. So you can take that verse and put in with the rest of them if you don't have it. So there's actually a handful more text that we have that way. Anyway, so that's our Dead Sea Scroll Old Testament. We're working on doing an Acts to Revelation, King James, or maybe modernizing it a little bit, but lots of notes. And then the Didache we did not too long ago. The Didache is a 1st century document. Everybody agrees it's between 50 and 100 AD. It talks about very clearly a pre-tribulational rapture, which is another amazing thing. I know I'm going to get in trouble with some people for saying that, but it is what it is. It's an amazing document. It's not authoritative. It's basically the church has got together and decided, if we get in trouble, if somebody claims to be a prophet or wants money, or how do we tell a con artist from a real brother in need? And here's what we're going to do, set aside an idea. We don't have to follow that because we could have a ministerial alliance and might work even better. But it's interesting to see what they did at that time. And I really wish we would take those things to heart. Epistle of Barnabas and the Didache and the Testament of our Lord are first century documents. So, and they tend to quote each other, which is pretty amazing, and quote scripture. So very, very interesting. The Testament of the Lord, we've already talked about. That's the thing that has a paragraph for each one of those words in Luke chapter 21, the signs on earth and the signs in heaven. And then that's not the cool part about the manuscript. It's got a lot of other interesting things. And then we have Polycarp's to the Philippians. Okay, I've got that twice. That's this one here. Eusebius is the father of church history. So we have, I'm going to put together a book eventually. We've got books 1 to 3. There's 10 books on our network, and I'm working on 4. But he has some amazing information about genealogies, Mary's genealogy, who was who, which one of the Marys was who, and who they were married to, and just all sorts of different things, all the alleged contradictions, why they're not contradictions, and the history of even the Essenes, the Therapeutae, some very amazing things. And then I just got this finished, I think, yesterday, the Psalms of Solomon. The Bible even talks about the fact that David and Solomon wrote a large number of Psalms, much more than what we have in our Bible. Well, this is a manuscript that was found, actually, most of these have been around about 100 years. So anyway, this one's been around a while, found in Greek. It's at least medieval, but medieval means it's probably a copy of a much older one. So it's not a new thing. But there's only 18 Psalms. But the fascinating thing about it is one of them, Psalm 18, the Psalm, it's hard to say, Psalm of Solomon 18, talks about the Messiah. And he has the idea in the Psalm, it's really interesting, the Messiah is sinless. And somehow he reconciles us to God when he comes. We just got to wait for his coming. And then there's some sort of a thing about, it doesn't say he comes and goes away, but it talks about him coming and doing something, and then there's a return, which means apparently he went away and he came back. But when he returns, he's going to set up the kingdom, which is going to be eternal. And that's when everything will be great and there'll be peace, and we'll all praise the Lord for it. So it's really interesting to see a premillennial view, at least from the Song of Solomon, or it's not the song, Psalms, that thing right there. So anyway, and it's got a lot of other things in it too. Not much prophecy, but just really interesting. So got that finished. So in process, I'm working on a translation of the Revelation from Hebrew. It's again that Koshin one. Again, 99% just like a King James when you translate it in English, but there's some very interesting things in there. For instance, just to give you an idea, in one of the places it talks about, our translation talks about it's talking about the Nicolaitans in one place, but close by that it talks about the synagogue of Satan that call themselves Jews but are not. And we always speculate, is that like Hebrew roots? Is that like a replacement theology, like a Calvinist? What would it have been? And probably could be all of those things taken to an extreme. But in this particular Hebrew version, it gives them a name. They're a specific name of these guys. So that lets us go back and try to, I haven't figured much out about it, but just things like that. It's like a name of a group. They're called the Nicolaitans or the Manichaeans or whatever. So we should be able to go back and find some stuff on it. There's a lot of interesting things. Wormwood, for instance, is the star that falls to earth and poisons everything. In the Hebrew version, it's not called wormwood. It's called scarlet, which is a red color. And what I thought was interesting is there is a plant that's poisonous called wormwood, but there's also a wormwood. The word is used for wood when it gets corrupted by certain larvae. And I forget the name. It's a crimson colored larva that actually makes the wood and it gets in food too, like any kind of plant material, and would poison it. It may or may not be what we're talking about, but I just think it's interesting. Wormwood, from a crimson colored worm poisoning the food or destroying the wood. So it's interesting that the Hebrew version calls it crimson and the Greek version calls it wormwood. It's not that one is correct and one's wrong, but different ways of looking at it. It's really imperative when we get something that we don't understand, if there are different words that describe it, pull all of those together and we'll actually get a much clearer picture of what's going on. We're working on the Levitical Targum and the Targum of Numbers, and then we have one of Isaiah and Psalms we want to get together. And then this is interesting here. This is in process. There is a couple of other manuscripts that give visions that Daniel supposedly had. One of the texts that I'm going to be talking about in the upcoming Branson conference is from the Aramaic study on the book of Daniel. And the interesting thing about it is I'm showing how the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about a 10 kingdom that's coming, and they only last for 7 years, and this kind of stuff. But in the Aramaic Targum, if I had it, I'd pull it up. But anyway, it says that there's an angel talking to Daniel, and he says, in the dream that you saw with the shooting stars, the shooting stars is their kingdom. And they're shooting stars, which means you see them just for a second and it's gone. They burn up real quick. So it means that they're short-lived, which helps us probably with Jude talking about wandering stars or shooting stars, but might actually even be a quote. But anyway, he says that that just means they're only going to be here for 7 years. So he actually interprets it for him. And I thought that was fascinating because, number one, that doesn't give us any new information, really. There's a 10 kingdom nation that's here for 7 years. There you go. We learned that in Revelation. So, but to say that there is a text held by a group of prophets, the Essenes were known to be 100% accurate prophets, apparently authoritative in their mind, telling us details about the 10 kingdoms that are only found in Revelation for us, and they're accurate, they're the same. And the text is talking about a vision that Daniel saw. And here's the interpretation of the shooting stars in your vision. So there is yet another vision of Daniel. It makes me think of like in chapter 12 when it says, seal up the vision and prophecy. Well, obviously he didn't seal up the book of Daniel because we've had it all along. But if there's another chapter of Daniel that has been sealed up, that would be interesting. And that's what this particular manuscript reports to be, the seventh vision of Daniel. I only found 5 in Daniel, and I was trying to figure out, are we missing yet another one? But it dawned on me in chapter 2 of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has the dream of the statue, and he says, somebody needs to interpret this for me, and if you don't, I'll kill you all. And I'm not going to tell you what the dream is. You tell me, because anybody can make up a story. Well, Daniel says, give me one night. I can't do it. I'm just human. So give me one night. I'll go home and pray. And the Lord is able to show me what he showed you. If I have the same dream, I'll come in and tell you, this is what you dreamed. This is what it is. And then I'll interpret it for you. And he does that. And the 3 other Israelites pray with him. He goes to sleep. He has the vision. The next day he comes in, tells him what the dream was, which I'm sure his jaw dropped at that point, and then gives him the interpretation. So I say all that just to say that Daniel chapter 2 actually is a vision that Daniel had. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had the same vision the night before, but it is a vision of Daniel. So that's actually the first one. And then there's the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th in the book, and then apparently a 7th one. This is really interesting because one of the books we have is the Apocalypse of Ezra, and it's actually called 2nd Esdras in the King James 1611. As a Protestant, we usually don't have the Apocrypha anymore, out of our King James, but it was put in there not by the Catholics, but by the Anglicans. So again, it's a safe place to store a document, putting it in somebody's canon somewhere. Not supposed to do that, but I'm glad that they did, because we wouldn't have those any other way, probably. So it talks about a vision of a three-headed eagle. And in this seventh vision of Daniel, it talks about the same three-headed eagle, but it gives you more information in a different way. This is very, very fascinating. So anyway, those are some of the things we're working on. Oh, and then this one here, there's a place called the Geniza in, I think it's right outside of Cairo. Anyway, it's in Egypt. There's several places around the planet that have a lot of different manuscripts. Some of the Russian Jews came down and brought stuff. For instance, for a number of years, we had the oldest Old Testament Bible. It's called the Aleppo Codex. It was found in Aleppo, Syria. And so it was like the one to go to, because it was the oldest, the only one that existed on the planet. Well, now that we've got a lot of Russian Jews that migrated to Israel, they brought with them some 30-some Aleppo codices that are just in the same time frame, a little bit older, a little bit newer, and they're almost identical. But these things are kind of coming out of the woodwork, so to speak. We're getting a lot of these manuscripts. So the Geniza, they have said that they have some 40,000 medieval Hebrew manuscripts that have not even been cataloged yet. And they're in the process of cataloging them, because they, will disintegrate one day. So one of the things that's interesting, when I went back to, let me run back to here and go to our bookstore again. When we were doing the book, Damascus Covenant, I have the Hebrew copy, and like most Dead Sea Scrolls, there's holes in the text. So I don't know what was written right there. Well, there was a copy of it in medieval Hebrew, about 1,000 years old, newer, but from the Geniza. And I was able to look at it, and it was word perfect, but it was the entire text. So that really helped us put this particular book together, the New Covenant of Damascus. So same kind of thing happens here with, actually, I forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, so there's lots of stuff going on. With the text of the other, okay. Anyway, the one I'm working on here, this one is pretty interesting, because there was a manuscript discovered in the Geniza in Egypt that is a history of the fallen angels Azazel and Shemyaza. Now, those are mentioned in the book of Enoch in detail, but mentioned occasionally by the church fathers and a lot of other texts. This is interesting because we wouldn't know this until now, but it actually quotes a couple of Dead Sea Scrolls and some of the Testaments. So that gives it a lot of credibility. Now, it is medieval, but it's either made up or they're quoting and telling you something from a manuscript thousands of years earlier. Church fathers do that too. The church fathers only go back 2,000 years, but they will quote manuscripts that they had that don't exist anymore. And they will give you a glimpse into history another 1,000 and sometimes 2,000 years before them. So that's why it's fascinating to get into this stuff. But this thing is pretty amazing. There's some questions I've had from some of the Dead Sea Scroll text. If you go back in our Enoch study, there's one study that we did on the Book of Giants. It's actually 2 fragments out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Apparently, according to this text, those 2 fragments are part of a much larger book that at least used to exist. And it gives us a little more detail, which is fascinating. So gives us the ability to hunt for another scroll. So this is the kind of thing that we're doing, and I just wanted to show you. So these things are done that we can actually start looking at next year. These things are in process. I'm trying to get done before the end of the year. And then we've got a few here that I'm working on, like Eusebius chapter 4. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's Psalms 151 to 175. Those need to be translated so we can look at them. May or may not be prophetic. If they're not prophetic, no big deal. If they are, it might be interesting. And then there are Sabbath songs. David apparently wrote, according to the scrolls, 52, is that right? Yeah, 52 songs, one for each Sabbath of the year on their calendar. And so we have a few of those. I don't think they're prophetic, but I definitely want to look at them in case. So we're going to be looking at those. And then Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John anyway, but I've got these in Hebrew. I want to do those also. Again, the Cochin ones. There's other church fathers, Ignatius writing to Polycarp. Ignatius wrote all of his books, 7 at least, that have some interesting prophecy and things in them. He was one of the first to talk about the fact that the Messiah is God incarnate. So way, way before there was a Constantine. But Ignatius was martyred in the year 95. So, and that's that same martyrdom that's going on. So Ignatius died before John wrote the book of Revelation, just to put a perspective on you. So anything he says, it's definitely, those are more first century documents that we would want to look at. And several of you have asked about the books of Baruch. First Baruch, just called Baruch, is in the Apocrypha. But there's also 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. Assumably fake. I don't know. I remember briefly going over them in seminary, but it's hard to tell. And then there's several of you have asked about the books of Adam and Eve. And I've repeatedly said that I know there's a Gnostic version and another one that's not Gnostic. But again, we looked at them just a little in seminary, and I don't remember much about them. One of the questions I think today was about the Epistle of Longinus. And that's one that we have here. We're going to do a translation of it. The legend is that Longinus was and he's also called Lentinius. So there's 2 different names for it. But he's supposed to be the Roman that pierced the side of Christ. And there's a book about him or something that he wrote, or gives us more information about that. There's the Epistle of Elijah, mentioned by Josephus, which apparently we don't have, but try to get a copy of it, or if there's a leaning toward it. There is a study on this book that exists, but I'm more interested in finding the book. And then there's some other things like that there. So those are just some of the things that we're working on. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you. So next year, hopefully we can do studies on all of these. I think we have a study on the Didache up on the main YouTube channel. And I think it's a complete study. So if you liked that, you'll definitely like all these others. So at this point, I'll go ahead and stop for tonight. And I just wanted to share those things with you. And we'll go to the chat room and see if we have any questions. And then we'll be back. Again, we won't be, let's see here. Let me go back to here just to make sure that we bring that up with our public calendar. So yeah, tomorrow's home study is canceled, but in December, you can just come here and look. The 9th is, we're not going to broadcast because we'll just be getting back from the Branson conference. And then the Monday before Christmas and the Monday before New Year's, we won't be broadcasting. So, okay, let me go to the chat room. Oh, we do have a few. All right, let's see here. Excited about the teaching today. Okay, well, great. Am I in the right place? I'm not in the pinned one. Okay, there we go. We still have a few. Okay. How valid is the letter of... Okay, that's the one that we were talking about. I'm not sure how valid it is. There's not just one version of it, though. And I shouldn't say that. The versions might be identical. But I mean, there are several Latin manuscripts. And then there's also, like I was saying, a Syriac and a few others. That really lends credibility to it. Because if somebody just made up a story and wrote it, it would probably just exist in that language. If everybody that was back then knew there was no Lentinius guy, then it would not be, translated. But if we have 1st and 2nd century documents, like a copy of it in Latin and Georgian and Syriac and Old Coptic, and it got around. So that, gives credence to it. So we do have several copies. I know we have Latin, Greek, and I think Syriac, and there might be one others. But again, we'll have to pull those together, see how accurate they are, how close. Sometimes you'll have a Greek and a Latin version, and they are totally different. So you know there's a problem somewhere. So we will definitely get into that. I knew the name. I don't think we even had a chance to study it in seminary, but I know a lot about the legends and things like that. So we'll see what happens. It goes along the same line as with, that's another one that I need to put on the list, but there are some text about Pilate, and there's some information about him that corroborates those texts in Acts chapter 29, the 29th chapter of Acts, something outside of Acts. So again, it could just be legends garbling together that are not true, but when you have them in multiple languages and multiple things, and you've got some churches that swear by them, these are great, we're going to put them in our canon, some different groups. It bears, investigation at least. Didn't the Copper Scrolls give an idea of where to look? Yes, they do, actually. At first, everybody kind of gave up on it because in the Copper Scroll, it was like, well, where is the buried treasure from the temple? Treasure might mean gold, might mean artifacts, might mean scrolls, might be all the above. But it would say things like go to the big rock and turn left and go to where the tree is and then go from there. And by now, we don't know which rock it was, and there are no trees, in that area. So it's just like, it was like, okay, give it up. But sometimes those things are not even so much coded as the word tree can mean a couple of different things. And almost always it's tree. So you read this, it's like, okay, the tree, and you don't give it a second thought. But it can mean something else. And so Barfield, and then there's a couple of other guys that have looked at it and said, okay, it can be translated this way, which still doesn't make sense where they think it is. But if you take it and put it in another location, it actually fits. And Barfield's team, I remember, had some guys go, again, it's illegal to dig. You can't do anything like that. But what you can do, if you get the local authorities' permission, and sometimes you can't do that, but you can go there and do scans. You can pay them some money and then just almost like take pictures of the dirt is what they're thinking. But deep scans, and you can tell very quickly if there's a cavity there. And if it's around someplace that looks like a big cavity and a small cavity, you can probably figure there's a door over here. So this is where you would dig to go down. And there's obviously things in the cavity. So if you look very carefully, you can see like this kind of thing. So there's objects here, scanning from above. So yeah, the Copper Scroll is one document that gives us a really good idea of where there are things. And I think his ideas are going to be corroborated because they've already done scans. There's definitely something there. Now maybe they'll open it up. It'll be a natural cavity, and the two big things are two rocks, maybe. But we need to look and see because there's got to be more stuff out there. Every time we get a scroll, like the one I was looking today about the history of Azazel, it mentions yet another document that's got the full history. It's not Enoch, it's something else. So it's like, okay, so that does exist. So, or did exist anyway. So we'll see. So yeah, that's one place, and it'll be really exciting to see all these others. How difficult is it transitioning to Linux? It used to be really hard. Now, not so much. From what I've seen, we have a lot of computers, and so I've played around, and it's usually like laptops or desktops. We usually buy them at the same time, so we'll have 2 or 3 of them or whatever. So like down here in the studio, my daughter-in-law sits over there and does the social media. Many of you that have written in with questions to questions@biblefacts.org or in the network, she will respond most of the time, and I'm here trying to do translations. She's over there doing that. My son's over there, and he's usually working on the video editing. So the second YouTube channel that's going to have all the translations, just the text, he's the one putting that together. So we're having a lot of fun over here looking at ancient stuff and doing a lot of things. But so we've tried that. I've tried that on 3 different laptops, um, 4 different desktops. Is that right? And not to, we're not doing anything with the phones because that's Android. We're just leaving phones and tablets alone. But and then I've had some other people that I've done stuff with. Anyway, recently, it's actually been pretty easy. So what I've done, I've played around with Arch Linux, and it's fantastic, except there's always something that doesn't work, seems like anyway. But basically, we've kind of landed on Pop OS, and they're putting together their own. They're getting away from GNOME, and they're trying to make everything work better, smoother. It looks like it's going to be a really good one. About a year and a half ago, the main problem for most people is the pass-through. So Linux was never designed for games. So when you do like a first-person shooter and things are moving real quick, it just doesn't work very well. But about a year and a half ago, they changed the kernel so that that goes through instantly. That's not checked or anything. You don't need to. It's just a video stream or an audio stream. You turn it on, turn it off, change the volume. It can't have a virus in it. So and that's made it work well. And like I say, we've tested it. My son's tested it. As a matter of fact, my wife had a video game that she liked to play. I think it was one of the Sims things. But anyway, and it flat stopped working. They don't support it anymore. It stopped working on Windows. And my son had some other game that I guess he said it was ported over from like PlayStation or something. But it was a Windows client, but it just flat never worked. You couldn't get past the login screen. It just won't work. We tried both of those on Linux. Works fine. It really surprised me. Every game that we tried. So, and of course, we're doing broadcasting here, but same kind of a deal. If games would work, the broadcast's going to work. So, and I've tried this here. We had a few problems back and forth, but I think we've got everything under control now. This has been a fantastic PC. Uh, all things equal, I would just stick with Windows because I know Windows. It's just as stable, if not more stable. I say that, but then Windows glitches a lot. There's been a lot of times when the mic won't work, and it's because it downloaded an update and started a process, and now I've got to shut all this down and reboot. One of the nice things about Linux is that you don't have to reboot most of the time. The kernel never gets changed, and so the other stuff, like loading a program, there's no reason to reboot. It's just a program setting up, or like an app. So it's a lot easier this time, other than eSword has been our one problem. And there's some Bible apps for Linux, but they're just not the greatest yet anyway. But anyway, as far as hardware goes, the one thing that usually glitches out is if you have a laptop with a lit keyboard, and maybe you don't care, but some people, like I've got one upstairs when I do the Bible study, and if it gets late at night and I'm looking at something up there, it's really hard to see the keyboard. I can turn a light on, of course, but I don't know, it depends on your eyes. I like having a backlit keyboard on everything. Now, if it's a keyboard you buy, those will usually work, not necessarily. If it's one on the laptop, it usually will not work. Sometimes they will. I was surprised. We put Linux Mint, Pop OS, and I think we tried another one, Zorin, on my wife's, on Donita's Surface. And the keyboard worked out of the box, no problem. We never had to mess with it. We had to work a little bit to get the touch screen to work. But most of the modern hardware will just work. And if you're talking about a desktop, I would be very surprised if it didn't just work. All of it, cameras, keyboards, everything. A laptop, I wouldn't be surprised if something didn't work, and it would usually be the backlit keyboard. The keyboard always works. If you're going to have problems, it'll be with the touch screen or the built-in camera. Those are usually where the problems are, but usually those work too. Um, but it's like anything else. I've had friends that were on Macs and they went to Windows and decided it's too complicated. I'm going back to the Mac. And I've had friends that are PC guys that went to a Mac and thought, forget this, just sell it and get a real computer, so they go back to Windows. So a lot of it is what you're used to. But as far as the install process, it's you just wipe Windows and put it in. One of the things I would suggest is if you have a Windows computer, you usually log into it with a Microsoft account. Well, if you do that, Microsoft will know it's that computer and that you have a license. So if you wipe the whole thing out, put Linux on it, and it doesn't work, and you try 2 or 3 different versions, it still doesn't work, and you decide, forget this, I'm going back to Windows, you can install Windows of any kind. And then when you log in with your account, it'll say, oh, this was supposed to be Pro, and you have the license, and boom, it just works. And the spyware, of course, is back too. So we'll do some stuff on that too, because there's things that you can do to get rid of the spyware. Really easy programs. So we'll talk about that sometime, but it's been difficult in the past. It's a lot easier now. Do we know what day Dr. Ken Johnson is speaking in the Branson conference? I think it's once on Friday and once on Saturday, if I remember correctly. Actually, yeah, that's the original schedule they sent me, and then they said they may have to switch things around, and I usually don't care. So it's like, okay, if you need to switch them around, whatever. So if they didn't switch me around, because some people will start to come and then can't, or they get sick or whatever, or whatever. So tentatively, I'm in the middle of the day somewhere, morning or afternoon on Friday, and one on Saturday, most likely. May not be able to get there till Saturday. Okay, so I'm not sure. It might be Saturday morning, but it all depends. And it'll be in the live stream and stuff, and of course you'll get that information and more here. Do you think Luke 21 it was a different setting altogether than Matthew 24 and Mark 13? Chuck Missler thought so, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I think instead of more of a totally different thing together, they might be focusing on more things that are different, but so many times things go in circles. So, for instance, when it talks about you will be brought before the courts, you will be persecuted, your family members will be the ones to do it. That did happen very, very much in the first century. And I'm sure it's going to happen again. You see that happening in communist China, the kids turning in the parents and stuff like that for being a Christian. So and if Nero and Antiochus Epiphanes did half those things like the Antichrist will, then again, those things are going to be very similar. Maybe not all of them, but this concept is keeps being replicated. So I'm not sure that they're that different. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see 2 or 3 things in Matthew or in Luke or Mark that were unique to back then and they don't happen again. But the concept is going forward, I think would happen a lot. I'll have to look that up with Missler and see why he thought that. That would be really interesting. What advantage is there to the Blue Letter Bible? I've always used eSword. I would still use eSword, but again, it doesn't work on Linux. The one thing that I want to do is to be able to pull up. Do I have that up here still? I don't think I do. So so the nice thing here about it, you just has these, and I can always put more in eSword. But if you do like Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 or something, you've got the King James or whatever one you have, but you can click on tools and it gives you a nice interlinear. So the word for and is, what's the V here? And Vayamar, which is and he said. And you can look it up in Strong's and see what it is. It's a mar, it's a verb. It means to tell or answer or speak or whatever. usually just said most of the time. So it's really nice in that way. Um, One of the few that I found online that has a really good interlinear. Now on the phone, I use Androids, not Apple, because Apple is really bad at spying on you. Um, but Android phones and tablets, they have something called MySword, which is really similar to eSword, only they have a really good, probably better than this one, a really good um, interlinear that I like. So there's really no difference. eSword, you'd have it on your computer or your laptop. So if somehow you don't have an internet connection, you can still use it. In this case, I can download the app on this on my phone, but the interlinear part, for licensing reasons, they can't just give it to you. So you have to be online. That's the bad thing about it. But I just figure with here, if I can't get online to get the Bible, I can't get online to broadcast, so it doesn't really matter. So who has the Cave 12 scroll? It'd be the Israeli Antiquities Department. Several friends of mine were on the dig that found it. Aaron Judkins, Randall Price, I think he headed the thing, or at least was part of it. And so the Israeli Antiquities at first they thought it was just blank paper, and then they realized it was very badly faded. So they have to do some sort of special scanning thing. But everybody's been at war, and who knows. So it was supposed to be possibly by the end of last year evaluated and the findings let go, but it never happened because of the war. But it's in safe hands, and we'll get it eventually. Does the day the flood started coincide with the day Jesus ascended? I'm just curious. Don't know exactly how to look it up. Well, the flood started on the 17th of the first month, or the second month rather, which is ER 17. Jesus' ascension would be 40 days after Pentecost, after resurrection, 17th. I think it'd be 10 days later, but that's a good point. It all depends on, see, like there's a difference between the Essene calendar and the Pharisee calendar that can be off at least a week. So that still might put it at the right time. Some of those things are hard to pinpoint, though. I mean, even just going on one calendar. I had never thought about that, but that's pretty interesting that it might be. Super chat, $10. Thank you very much for the supporting. We have GiveSendGo and PayPal if you want to donate more. And thank you for being in here and asking questions and buying the books. It really helps the ministry go forward. Reading Ancient Paganism and Cults in the Trinity. Your books like these and the Book of John, John versus the Gnostics, are like source texts for some of me in discussions and debates. Thank you for your books. Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, cults in the Trinity. The cults usually come along and say there is no Trinity. It was made up by Constantine. And like I was saying earlier, all the way back to Ignatius, before John even wrote the book of Revelation, he was martyred. And in his text, he makes it extremely clear Jesus is God incarnate. And then he mentions the Holy Spirit. He didn't pull them together and say they are a Trinity. I don't think the word had been invented yet, but the concept's clearly taught. And now that we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, all the testaments talk about the divinity of our Lord, and some of them reference Hashem, being the Father, the Messiah, and the Ruach HaKodesh being God. Not the same being, but somehow the same God. And they didn't bother to explain it. It just is what it is. And then you get like 11Q13 that very clearly shows the Messiah is God incarnate. It's just really, really fascinating. And then John versus the Gnostics, all the stuff that he's describing in there, we go through and look at the Gnostic cults of that day and see which ones were teaching that, and kind of pull together some of the manuscripts and look at them. So when I was putting it together, I thought, why am I bothering with this? These cults have been dead and gone for 2,000 years. Nobody even remembers their names. But the teachings are still around. There's still New Age people teaching a Christ consciousness. That's what Alexander the Coppersmith taught, and the Carpocratians and some of the other groups. Not all of the Gnostics, but some of them did. And just different things like that. So it really helps us to understand. If someone in your church is teaching a Christ consciousness, we look at them usually like you're a nut, and that's it. But Paul excommunicated Alexander the Coppersmith for that specific reason, that he was teaching a Christ consciousness, and that was the last straw. I mean, you might have a drinking problem, or you might have this, and things happen. But that is completely unacceptable, to lead people astray like that. So, yeah, thank you very much. I'm really glad they help. And in the debates, that's cool. D became an angel level. Okay, well, welcome aboard. Be glad to have your questions and comments. Chris says, could the desire of women be babies? The desire of every Jewish woman was to give birth to the Messiah. Would the Antichrist, a wolf in sheep's clothing, start out pro-life, but then flip to pro-choice? That's interesting. It's right in the middle of the text about gods, though. He doesn't worship the God of his fathers or the desire of women. He does not regard the desire of women. And then he does not, I forget, there's two other things that are gods. So they're all in there. So the Messiah part would actually fit. But yeah, pro-life to pro-choice, maybe. I've often thought, it says that he sits in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God, and then he stops the sacrifices. Well, the only people that would really love to stop the animal sacrifices would be like PETA, I forget what that is. My kids always give me the acronym PETA, means people eating tasty animals. And I know that's not that. Like the ethical protection of animals or something like that. Anyway, but I can see at least him using that. These evil Jews are killing poor little innocent animals. Now we're going to kill them and eat them, but that's different. They can't kill and eat their animals. But yeah, it might be something like that. I've often thought that he would at least use the animal groups to try to come against temple sacrifices. But the Messiah part, yeah, pro-life, pro-choice, that'd be interesting. He certainly kills a lot of people, so that kind of makes sense. Does Chernobyl mean wormwood? Yes, that's, at least, I don't know Russian, but that's what I've heard, that in Russian, Chernobyl means wormwood. I always thought that was interesting. Obviously, it's not the wormwood spoken in the Bible, because that's in the tribulation period, which hasn't started yet. And wormwood was a decade or so back. It's a ways back. So very interesting, though. So we're getting that whole idea. Wormwood, Chernobyl, poisoning the water. Scarlet is another word for it in the Hebrew. So pull all those together and see what we can kind of find. But yeah, that's what I was told, that it did mean that. What's Trello's website? Trello is a thing for like a Kanban, and it's just Trello.com, I believe. But like if we go back to ours, yeah, it's Trello.com. And if we get out of all of this, you can create an account and do all sorts of stuff. But just to do like this, so you can have different. Well, I showed you mine, so I can take it and do a date, put a due date on it, and it'll beep at me if I don't have it done. And but I'm kind of using it to organize everybody else here, so we can get stuff done and have meetings and everything. But I've used it before, and it's helped me a lot of time to try to get things done in time. You can also do time management, like if you have employees, there's different things like that. But there's a free version, and I think 2 different paid versions. So like this is my calendar one. So if you go to the board view, this is the same thing. So these are the home fellowships, which is the Tuesdays. So I've got these flipped around. Okay, anyway, These are the, it should be like this. So here's an example. Oh, I can't move it on this one. I've got this one set to public, and this is not logged in. So let me go over here. There we go. So this is an example. I could take these and move them around like that, the whole lists, or I could take one of these and put over here, do that kind of thing. And then on each card, you've got labels. So this one's on hold for some reason. And there's a description, activity. You can add dates to it, a checklist, a label, different members, request to join it, put a location in it if it's going to be an event somewhere. There's lots of stuff you can do with it. So it's a really interesting thing. So, but it's Trello.com if you're interested. I've used it before, but we started using Microsoft Office, and then they had a version where you'd go up and it would have Planner, and I wanted to use that, so we switched over to it. And the Planner was really good, but it was twice as expensive, and we didn't need it for 2 people at the time, just me and my wife. But so we went back to the regular, and then when they started doing recall and some of the other stuff and the advertisements and stuff, I decided, yeah, maybe we need to start looking elsewhere. So we're using LibreOffice now, which is just like Microsoft Office, only it's free. Instead of a OneDrive, we're using Mega. That does cost, for storage a little bit, not very much. And that works out really good. And so I broadcast with OBS, Open Broadcaster software. That actually came from the Linux world, but there's Linux and Windows and Mac, I think, type things. And then trying to think what else we have. That's online. For mail, we use Proton Drive, Proton Mail, the Proton Suite. So that's fantastic, really nice and secure. Trying to think what else we use. But my son is skilled in making graphics with, I do all my graphics, like the web graphics, in GIMP. GIMP is like Adobe Photoshop, but it's free, but just as powerful. And he uses Inkscape, which is a lot like another Adobe product. Adobe is beginning to be very evasive now too, and try to track what you're doing. And Facebook was the one that started all that. So I still have a Facebook account, and it basically has me there, and I use it to check family members and stuff. I'm on there maybe once a year. And there's just one thing on my Facebook account that says, I don't use this much. Here's my website. Here's where I broadcast. See you there. We do have Rumble also, so different things. And we also have Odyssey. And we had them set up to where I do the broadcast on YouTube and they automatically trickle out. But YouTube has decided that they don't want to do that. So they cut Rumble off a ways back. And I got a note from Odyssey about 3-4 weeks ago that they've been cut off also. So just recently. Odyssey, very few people use it. It's a really cool system, the way it's set up, but very few people over there. In the same amount of years on YouTube, we've grown to 80, what is it now? Like 80, at least 85,000 people. And we have about 2,000 or 3,000 on Rumble. And I think we have like maybe 35 on Odyssey. Just nobody uses it. But anyway. Okay, next question. When the Bible mentions people flowing into the mountain of the Lord, the mountain sits on all the other hills, doesn't it seem to imply that the kingdoms of men are controlled by his kingdom? Yeah, that's what it would be. Just like a river flows into something that gathers them up, or whatever. So the kings, so we're talking about figuratively anyway, that we flow to the mountain of the Lord, we come there to worship him, all the nations send representatives in. So something along those lines. Yeah, I would say so. I heard about stone tablets or something of the book of Ezekiel that are supposedly carved by himself in letters in bas relief. Is this a real thing? Yes. I've got some photos of it. The cool thing about it is it was the legend is that he wrote it, and everything, but it was actually uh, buried in what's supposed to be anyway. I can't verify, that it's really him or anything, but in Iraq is where, Babylon is where he died, and his tomb is there, and it's well known. There's only one place that I know of, and everybody says that's Ezekiel's tomb. Well, in the earlier part of the 19th century, it was excavated, and the tablets were discovered. And they're black basalt tablets written in, like you said, bas relief. And it's the book of Ezekiel from start to finish. My understanding is there's one word, one, that's different from our text and that one. And it's really interesting because his says Hezekiah did this, and ours says King Hezekiah did this. So obviously somebody decided we needed to know that it was the King Hezekiah we're talking about, not somebody else. But I thought that was fascinating. So yeah, that's that. It now exists in the Israeli Antiquities have it. And a lot of people, there's always somebody trying to say, oh, it's fake. He couldn't, black basalt tablets don't exist in Babylon or something like that. They're always coming up with something. It could be, but it's the only known tomb. Like sometimes there's a debate on where the tomb of Jesus is or someone. Martin Luther said it well. If Christ only had 12 disciples, then how can 18 of them be buried in Germany? So, and that's just his way of saying, most of the relics are junk. But if there's only one known tomb and you break into it after centuries and that comes out of it, that part's for sure. Those texts, those tablets came out of a tomb that's supposed to be his. And it is the book of Ezekiel. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. We can't really prove that anything is real. Sometimes you can prove it's fake by radiocarbon dating or looking at the text itself, or it'll contradict scripture or something like that, like the Gnostic texts. In a sense, they're real because they're definitely first century, written by heretical cults of that time period. So that it makes sense. But yes, it is a real thing. We should do a study on that sometime. Ultimately, like I say, it's one word different from the actual text we have. So it's all the same thing. Question, Genesis 3:15, the seed is singular. Is the serpent seed the Antichrist only, or is there any indication of a lineage involved? I believe the text is referring to the Antichrist, so I would assume it would be singular and be talking about the Antichrist only. I mean, in a sense, there's lots of Antichrists and there's lots of holy people, but there's no like direct lineage of anything. There was a lineage from Adam through Noah, through Shem, through Abraham, through David to Messiah. But yeah, I think it's referring specifically to the Antichrist. Super chat, $20. Thank you very much for the donation. Really appreciate it. Then we've got one more question. It says in Revelation 17:11 says that the beast is one of the seven and is also an eighth, and it seems connected to Apollyon, who was let out of the pit. Is this a man, king, or a kingdom? Actually, yes, if you think about it. And the way the Hebrews think, you can't have a kingdom without a government. The government has to have at least a figurehead. So the king himself, the government itself, or the people, or the land mass doesn't really amount to anything. It's all of them together. So the Antichrist couldn't do much without armies. The armies wouldn't know what to do without a leader. So it's really all the same thing, much like in Daniel when it talks about the gold kingdom. It says, you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. And people say, well, did he mean Nebuchadnezzar as a person or the empire? Well, it's both, and actually when you go through, the prophecy is that he would have, there'd be 3 generations and they'd be taken over by the Persians. There would be, after the first takeover, there'd be 4 more people of Persia, then it would be taken over by the Greeks. And then we're talking not about the 3 and the 4, but just one at a time. So we're talking about the empires. So yeah, and my understanding is like he's one of the 7. He's also the 8th that comes out of it. So there's a couple of different ways of looking at that. He is the 11th kingdom that comes to take over the 10. 3 rebel and are destroyed, so that leaves 7, and he is the 8th among them. As far as the heads on the dragon that represent the different empires, he's the final one also. And I think it also represents that he's that 7th one, but it morphs into a different kind of government. So it's really an 8th, a different kind. We see that in the middle of the tribulation period. So good questions. Okay, so we will. Oh, didn't know I clicked on that. Logos is a pretty good program. I used to use it a long time ago, but they're kind of expensive. So I started doing eSword. That was free. We donated to eSword, but Rick Myers, I think, is the guy that put that one together. So anyway, so yeah, we will be. Can I go back to this? Okay. So we will be back on. Is it this one? Okay. Anyway, go back to here. Oh, this is what I was looking at. So we will have the calendar here. We will be here next week, next Monday, the 2nd. But then we have the Branson conference, so we will not be here on the 9th. So in December, the 9th, the 23rd, and the 30th, we won't be broadcasting, but we will every other time. So, okay, you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving. We'll be back next time and through this next year to study all these cool scrolls. And if you guys ever find a scroll or hear a rumor of something like this, just let us know. Send us an email or something. We'll research it, see if we have it or if we can get it. So that would be fantastic to do. So thank you guys, and we will see you next time.